Thanks for being part of this first of what I hope will be many annual events related to the business climate here in Maryland. The topic for this session is partnerships and innovation as it relates to higher education. And we have with us four panelists representing higher education here in the state of Maryland, and I'll introduce them in a second. But when you think about innovation and you think about higher education, some of the historical things that come to mind that we all sort of pop into our heads are things like Silicon Valley, Route 128 in Massachusetts, and Research Triangle in North Carolina. And today there's been a lot of mimics of those. You hear of Silicon Alley in New York, Silicon Hills in Austin, and Silicon Forest in Oregon. Dan Abdelnabi was just at a work session with us, and we were talking about how you create vibrant ecosystems, and somebody said something about, let's say, Silicon Valley or Boston be going through a remarkable change, and he says, you really can't steal someone else's remarkable change. They already have that remarkable change. You've got to come up with your own remarkable change, and so that's what we hope to do as we work on this steering group that was announced earlier. But the reason innovation and partnerships go hand in hand with those parts of the country and many, many others is because of the anchor institutions, particularly the universities that are in those regions. The anchor institutions, we talk about meds, feds, and eds, and today we're talking about the eds specifically, are where the knowledge economy really thrives and where we nurture it and provide the workforce that helps create it and move it forward. So today we're going to talk about innovation, we're going to talk about partnerships, we're going to talk about higher education and how they all fit together. Let me introduce the panel. We have, going left to right, Wallace Lowe, the president of the University of Maryland College Park. Next to him is Ron Daniels, the president of Johns Hopkins University. David Wilson, the president of Morgan State University. And the Reverend Brian Linnane, the president of Loyola University of Maryland. And please join me in welcoming them here today. So we've come up with a series of questions that will go to different panelists, and then there's an overarching question at the end, and then we'll open it up to the audience as we just did with the previous presentation. And I'm going to start with President Daniels. Partnership and collaboration are popular terms today, as I've said. Why, in your view, are they so important to higher education, and how are they changing and impacting your institution and how it does business?
Thanks, Bob, and it's a real pleasure to be here at this event, which I think is really important in setting a stage for a lot of things that we're actually hoping to do in Maryland at Hopkins, and indeed with my peers that are on the podium with me today. So the question is about partnerships, why they're important. And I think it's quite simple. That is that we recognize, as much as we have very strong assets, a very complex and well-funded research enterprise, great education programs, that there's limits to our ability to impact society. And so that you recognize that we don't have a monopoly on knowledge, that we don't have a monopoly on all the assets that we'd ultimately like to engage in the development of our program. And so you got to look outside for partners who can help you leverage the strengths that you have in your institution. And that happens in a wide array of different places. It happens in the work that we're doing in biomedical science and the research that we're doing there, both at a basic level and at a clinical level. But it also happens in a lot of the work we're doing with partners in a number of different Baltimore-based institutions, from the city school system to small startups, social incubators. You know, across the board, we recognize in order to be able to truly draw on the benefits of the ideas and the energies that we have in the institution, we've got to partner with others to make that happen. And we become better for that, and I think the partners with whom we work also become better in terms of their ability to pursue the products, the services, the goods that they're seeking to create.
Great overview. Any of the others like to jump in on that one a bit? Go with the next one? All right, let me go with President Lowe. An innovation-led economy is said to be the most dynamic and resilient type of economy. How is your institution embracing and helping to drive that innovation?
It's on. Good. I'm low tech, so I don't know how to operate these things.
And you notice he looked at the lawyer sitting to his left. There's like a bad joke of two lawyers trying to figure out how to work this microphone, Wallace, but we did it.
But you should know I'm a different kind of lawyer than you are. I'm a public interest lawyer, which means that it's in the public interest that I don't practice law anymore. Well, thank you for having me here. This is a very important session. I'm glad to see hundreds of members of the business and the general community interested in the issue of innovation. I'm just curious, how many Terps or honorary Terps or have family members who are Terps are here tonight or this afternoon? All right, that's a great turnout. On the issue of innovation, let me begin this way. A couple years ago or 2 or 3 years ago, I saw on the front page of the New York Times a searing image of a protest movement in Wall Street. A young woman standing there with a placard saying, young, educated, unemployed. That stuck with me because I think one of the greatest challenges of this generation is economic development and job creation. And what can a university do to contribute to that end? This is what we do. We educate the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs across all disciplines. Number 2, we create ventures. The faculty and the staff and the students create new companies. Number 3, we connect with the larger community. We find partners in the business community to help them incubate and accelerate their inventions. And 4th, most importantly, we are helping to transform the surrounding community. This is the notion of Greater College Park, to create an innovation ecosystem, not only for that region, but for the entire state. So let me briefly go through each of them. My number 1 priority is that every one of the 38,000 students at the University of Maryland is exposed to the thinking of innovation and entrepreneurship. Not mandatory courses, but making incentives, making it attractive for them to do so. And I'm pleased to say that at this point, after 5 years on the job, almost 6, 50% of the students have signed up for some courses or some co-curricular activities having to do with innovation and entrepreneurship, not just in technical areas, but also in the arts and the humanities, because it is a way of thinking that transcends the particular subject matter. Secondly, is the creating of startups. I can tell you that, for example, in the past 10 years, 70 students have created about 80 startups that have attracted $360 million of venture capital. But what is as exciting to me is social innovation. And I can just give you one very short example. This English major realized that we throw away huge amounts of food because all the food that's presented in the dormitories and in cafeterias that's not served has to be thrown away. So he educated himself on public health regulations. He assembled a small army of students, 20 students, and they went around, collected all the food, and took that to homeless shelters. By the end of the year, they were serving 30,000 meals. But that wasn't the only thing. Then they created a startup company, a not-for-profit called the Food Recovery Network. This was 3 years ago. Today, I'm proud to tell you that this not-for-profit, started by students, is in 130 universities in this country. And when he appeared in Good Morning America last summer, the anchor said to him, well, so what's your vision? What's your goal? And he calmly said, my goal is to have the Food Recovery Network in all 4,000 colleges in this country, and we will end hunger in America. That is innovation. So let me just say one last thing. Let me tell you another story. There was a student who left Maryland. He never graduated. I think he quit after his freshman year because he was too busy, too preoccupied with starting companies. So he left the university after his freshman year, started 2 or 3 companies, then decamped to Silicon Valley, and you may have read about him in the newspapers 2 or 3 years ago. He started Oculus. It was purchased by by Facebook for $2 billion, and he came back to us and gave us a huge gift that has enabled us to build right now a state-of-the-art computer science and innovation facility. And he made it very clear, I expect the University of Maryland to create 150 new startup companies based upon this new technology of virtual reality. But then I said to him, well, why did you leave? Why did you go to Silicon Valley? Why didn't you do it here in Maryland? It was a very revealing answer. He said, what is there to do in College Park? There's no place to live. There's no amenities. There's not even a decent grocery store. That is when the light bulb went on. Why is the state investing all this money in talented students, and then many of them leave the state? So what we're trying to do is to create an innovation ecosystem, which means we're leveraging $1 billion of construction on this campus that over the past 3 years has been leveraged to generate $1 billion of private capital. So we're building hotels, we're building amenities, we're building mixed-use housing, because you need that infrastructure. It's not enough to have talent and to have laboratories, and this is the innovation ecosystem that we're building at the University of Maryland.
Exciting stuff. Innovation takes on many different paths. Anybody want to jump in? I'm going to give you guys a chance to jump in on each of these if you want to, but all right, we'll go on. Father Linnane, the quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," is often attributed to the late business management author Peter Drucker. Which is most important in your mind in addressing the needs of higher education today and opportunities for the future, culture or strategy?
Well, I would vote culture, and particularly because Loyola has just gone through an exercise of strategic planning, and it's just been approved by our trustees, and it's called the Ignatian Compass. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term Ignatian, that's making an adjective out of the name Ignatius. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, the order that sponsors Loyola, and also the patron saint of Loyola. And we've gone back to look at a number of our core strengths, such as excellence in teaching and research, social service, community justice, but also looked at a number of the things that have divided us and divide many college campuses today. The economic turndown that has had a great effect in higher education. I will have the distinction of being the first president in 165 years to bring the university through the experience of a reduction in force, not something that helps me sleep at night. Similarly, we've seen racial tensions in our nation, in our city, and on our campuses. We've also seen political polarization on our campuses and across the country. These are things that have divided the university, particularly as a time when we strive to be more and more diverse. So part of our 4 points, our 4 pillars for this strategic plan are educational innovation, Ignatian engagement, Ignatian citizenship, and institutional viability and sustainability. The Ignatian citizenship comes out of a very clearly expressed desire by the members of, over 300 members of our community who were involved in generating this plan, to understand the mission of our school and to have a lived experience of that mission. And of course, our mission is academic excellence, but we do it in a distinctive way because of our Jesuit heritage and the link to service. And so we are doubling back with this for our employees, for our faculty, to understand our mission, and so to help and to see that as being united enough to move forward with educational innovation and to find the path toward greater sustainability. Already we've seen great success with this, and therefore I think this attention to our culture and having a vibrant culture is, as Drucker points out, far more important and ultimately absolutely dependent upon the success of any strategic plan.
If I could follow up on that, there were a couple of articles, I believe, in this morning's Higher Ed News that some of the small liberal arts colleges that are having trouble with enrollment are looking at their student bodies and doing an analysis and finding, that they find that there's a group of students, the vast majority of their students have certain things that they're interested in: globalization, diversity issues, civic engagement, and trying to build a curriculum around that. It sort of goes back to both the culture of the institution, what its mission has been, what kind of student it has attracted, and also the strategy of building your enrollment back up again. Are you seeing that at Loyola at all?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly in our last strategic plan, globalization was one of the key things that we looked at because we're one of the top 5 schools in the country for international academic experiences. And our students articulated that they felt while we look at the Western world quite well, there are whole areas of cultural competencies that we don't have that are really essential. I think also that we've touched upon this in the conference today, the whole issue of global health and healthcare resources, not necessarily medicine, but the opportunity to think critically about this important question is very important on our campuses and sorts of things that we're finding employers want, and so to circle back to them and to articulate and provide the things that employers are looking for, at the same time reinforcing the things that we perceive have been valued in Jesuit education, which is critical thinking and effective communication and the like. And so definitely those enrollment-driven, the whole question of return on investment, and I'm a theologian, I never heard that term until I became president, but is critically important to our parents, particularly when they're making such an investment. They want to be sure that there's a job or a pathway to a profession at the end of the 4 years. And so we think very critically about that. We are in the process now of reimagining our undergraduate curriculum precisely to gear our students to the needs of the 21st century employers.
Great. Thank you very much. David, this is a question that I get asked a lot. New approaches to teaching and learning abound. We talk about online education, competency-based education, adaptive learning, all kinds of new approaches. Is the traditional campus dying or dead?
It's a loaded question. Is the traditional campus dying or dead? But I will respond to that. But first of all, I would like to express my appreciation to the Governor's Summit for thinking about higher education as anchor institutions to spur innovation, to spur job creation, and to really be anchor institutions in the cities and in the areas where they are located. Higher education is in a period of immense transformation. And quite frankly, we don't know how to wear this suit well. Harvard was established in 1636, and from 1636, one can argue, until about the 1970s, higher education was built around the concept of 18 to 22-year-olds going away to college, staying in a residential hall, and that was the experience. But something actually commenced to happen in the 1970s, and it really kind of pushed higher ed to a point where that particular structure no longer served what the shifting population was presenting to us. So, for example, today, only 29% of all students in higher education in this nation are 18 to 22-year-olds. And so 71% are not students that are just coming out of high school and making their way onto our campuses. Yet the campuses are erected around that model. And so therefore, the challenge for us is to seriously think about this new business model. And I think there are 3 things in particular that are proving to be an even greater challenge for us as we try and think through this. One is the explosion of technology. We had Thomas Friedman on our campus last semester, and it was one of the most amazing lectures that I had heard. And I fashioned myself as a person to try and keep abreast of what's happening in higher ed. But the way he fashioned his argument, I think left everybody in the room with heads spinning. He said, you know, if you're thinking about the world today and you're not thinking about it in these terms, you're not thinking about it correctly. If you're not thinking about it in terms of pre-2007 versus post-2007. If you're still in the pre-2007 way of thinking about it, you are, I think, traveling down the path of obsolescence. And I was curious as to, well, what happened in 2007? And so in 2007, we got this explosion of technology. Facebook was established in 2007, Instagram, Twitter. I mean, all these things happened, and they kind of changed the very way in which individuals access information and access content. And so the question then, are traditional campuses in peril? I would say absolutely, if they are not taking full advantage of this understanding of the way that model has shifted, and are not just trying to build buildings that are emulating what has been on our campuses for decades and decades and decades. Employers, based on the surveys that we have done, are looking at skills acquisition. Do you have the skills to do the job? We don't care how you acquire them. And so we have to think about online. We have to think about hybrid models. We have to think about credit for prior learning. And so the great majority of individuals in this country between 25 and 49 don't have a college credential, yet those are the individuals that are in the workforce, and we need to think about how we provide them with the skills that they need, and that is not always through a college education. And so let me just round out this by saying that I'm very, very excited to be the 12th president of Morgan State University as we celebrate our sesquicentennial, 150 years. And I often say that we've been just a remarkable institution, I think undervalued, underappreciated for a significant portion of that time. We're number one in the United States in producing African American electrical engineers. We're number one in producing African American industrial engineers. We're number one in producing African American civil engineers. We're number 4 in the United States in producing African American engineers in every field. And I can go down the list and down the list and down the list, but I often say that we can't be for the next 150 years what we were for the first 150. And so it's exciting to be on the campus as we begin to think about how we take some of what has made the institution great, carry that with us into the future, but then embrace that which is to come and that which we have not seen or experienced yet.
Very, very good insights. One of my lighter comments when I'm in a large group like this, and I'll say, I'm not sure what's happening with traditional campus, but how many of you in the room want to give your son or daughter a laptop, tell them to go to their bedroom and earn a bachelor's degree? And nobody really wants to do that. They want the child to leave and go get socialized. And we... So...
Or just leave.
Or just leave. and change the locks. But the... I think, I don't know where it's all going exactly, because we also, have, and just to give the audience some sense of this, playing off of what David just said, we take in 36,000 students each fall on 12 campuses. Only 11,000 of them are traditional freshmen today. So, David is absolutely correct. I mean, the mixture of students in general is changing dramatically in terms of age and mix. And yet there is very high demand still. I mean, College Park has huge demand, I'm sure, all the campuses. And so you have this sort of dichotomy in terms of market share moving around, but I don't think the traditional campus personally is going to die very soon, but I do think we have to reinvent it. And it fits into the culture and strategy piece also. But,
And my career has largely been with traditional age college students. And I started teaching in 1994, and the students that we have today look very similar to the students that I encountered in 1994, clean cut, J. Crew, that kind of thing, at least at Loyola and Holy Cross where I taught previously. But they're entirely different in their learning modalities. And I remember the first student who sent me an email to ask about an assignment, and I sort of thought, wow, that's kind of nervy. How does she even know I use this thing? And because I would just look at it once, it didn't even exist when I was in graduate school. I would look at it maybe once a week to catch up with friends, and now it has transformed the way professors deal with their students. And of course, the whole technological revolution that really beckons us to look very carefully, because we could become obsolete if we don't approach them in the ways that are most effective for their learning.
All right, let me throw out a question that anybody can answer. The title of the session has partnership and innovation in it. So let me ask first if you could briefly give an example, because I'd like you all to do this, of a partnership that has really had an educational impact on your campus. Any kind of partnership. Whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, I'll start. One partnership that comes to mind is a partnership that we have with Travelers, headquartered out of Hartford, Connecticut. There's a huge shortage in this country of actuarial scientists. And Travelers was having the dickens of a time recruiting actuarial scientists. They wanted to diversify its workforce, and basically trying to hire minority actuarial scientists was just out of the question. And so they came to us, and we started a conversation with them. And that conversation led to Travelers saying, well, would you start a baccalaureate program in actuarial science? We listened. They have supported the program. They're giving us, it's roughly about $5 million. And we have the only undergraduate actuarial science program in the state of Maryland. And we've had it now for about 6 years. All of those students have graduated. They get jobs almost six figures. And so this has also, once again, it's hearing a corporation, kind of understanding their needs. Travelers has hired about 30% of the graduates, but they have a wider mission, and it is, even though they're not going to hire all the graduates, those graduates will be available for other insurance companies and others who need these actuaries as well.
Why don't I take a crack at it? And Bob, let me answer your question with two responses. One, let me talk about a partnership that we feel really good about that has impacted our students and their ability to find their way in the life sciences. And so there's an interesting educational payoff there. But another partnership which actually has involved us in increasing learning outcomes for Baltimore City public school students. The first one is a partnership we concluded about 2 years ago with MedImmune headed by Bahija Jalal, who was here earlier today. Of course, large biopharm company that is part of the AstraZeneca conglomerate. And we recognize at Hopkins that we've got very large biomedical graduate programs, but only about 25% of the students who will get a PhD through those programs will ultimately enter into academic research. So the question is, what happens to the other 75%? And this is an issue that's commanding more and more attention within research universities, within the federal government and so forth. Are we over-educating? Are we over-training people in the biomedical area and doing so with a sense that there are not sufficient jobs? However one comes out on that question, the one thing we realized was that we were not doing a good job in terms of giving students who are getting PhD level skills a familiarity with and easy access to industry. So this led to a discussion with Bahija, and ultimately what we did was to create a new PhD program that is a partnership between Hopkins and MedImmune, where our students are getting core skills in biomedical sciences, but getting placements and research opportunities within MedImmune that ultimately will take them into careers in industry. So we're recognizing that these are students who are not going to ultimately be committed to an academic career, but an industry career. But nevertheless, employers like Bahija see real value in PhD level training. So again, this is a case where we're increasing our relevance to local industry, which is good, a pipeline for skills that firms like MedImmune require, but also giving our students better direction and career opportunities so that they're finding easy pathways to industry. The second example, which I think is really interesting and manifests a slightly different approach, About a year and a half ago, I was having lunch with Linnane, the city's health commissioner, and at the conclusion of the lunch, I said to Lena, I said, if you could wave your wand, if there were one single public health intervention you could do that would change the trajectory for school kids in Baltimore of a public health character, what would it be? And without missing a beat, she said, eyeglasses. And I said, well, what do you mean eyeglasses? And she said, well, here's the really tragic story. For the last several years, the Baltimore City Public Health Commission has been doing vision tests in kindergarten, grade 3, and grade 8. But when the kids fail that vision test, they don't leave with a prescription. What they leave with is a note that essentially goes to their parents saying, you should get your child over to an optometrist, get a proper vision test because they probably need a corrective lens. Of those students who receive those notes, and a significant percentage do, a very significant, if not the majority share, never get to an optometrist, never get the correction. So she said, here would be really great if we could find a way to make sure that those kids get prescriptions. Long story short, we, along with the city health department, with the city school system, with some outside philanthropy, with Warby Parker, that turns out one of our graduates was one of the founders of Warby Parker, ended up creating a program that we're doing on a pilot basis for the next 3 years, where essentially every student in the Baltimore City school system will go out. Well, when they fail that vision test run by the City Health Commission, the kids who fail it will be directed outside where there's a vision van waiting. They'll go and they'll get a vision test, they'll get a prescription, they'll choose their frames, and the problem's solved. And so, there's lots of theories about what our school systems need, changing faculty-student ratios, Montessori versus other teaching approaches. Glasses seems to be relatively straightforward, but it took a partnership with a number of different public and private actors to pull it off. So I think that's an example.
Yes, very quickly, I'll just mention 2 partnerships. Since we're in Baltimore, I should mention the partnership between University of Maryland College Park and University of Maryland Baltimore. When I arrived here 6 years ago, the first thing I asked was, how many joint faculty appointments, meaning faculty who work collaboratively together, and we have 10,000 faculty and staff in College Park, work jointly with our colleagues in Baltimore? You know what the answer was? 1. That person was half-time in engineering, half-time in the medical school, and when he went to apply for a home loan, he was turned down because the bank said you did not have a full-time job. In the years since, 4 years or so have elapsed since then, we now have about 70 joint appointments with about 20 or 30 more in the pipeline. And together, they have generated $80 million in research funding that neither school could have generated alone. My favorite example is this neurosurgeon approaches our engineering department and says, there are parts of the brain that cannot reach. Are you able to construct a robot that I can then navigate to the brain and the robot does the snipping? You know something? They built it. They got a patent, they created a company. This is the kind of impactful collaborations that are possible. Because when you bring 2 universities with complementary, not duplicative talents and skills, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. 1 + 1 can equal 3 or 4. The second example I would give is we started a partnership. Northrop Grumman approached us. They said cybersecurity is a major issue. Everybody knows that in places like China, you start teaching kids about coding and cybersecurity in 8th grade. We're not doing that in this country. So they funded a program called ACES, and it brings in 100 students that do nothing but live, eat, and work and dream about cybersecurity. We have about 400 students. Their average GPA upon entering is 4.2. Their average SAT score is somewhere around almost 1,400. They're the best of the best. And they're divided into camps, attackers and defenders. and they are from all fields, technical fields, from journalism, from public policy. We are training the next generation of cyber warriors in this country, and that is all due to the support of the business sector with whom we've partnered.
Great stories.
Sure. I would point with some pride to our partnership with our neighbors, the York, and we refer to it as the York Road Initiative. York Road is the eastern flank of Loyola's Evergreen campus in North Baltimore, and it faces some particular challenges. And we really looked at that very carefully. Particularly, this came out of a reflection of what happened to universities and to the city after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And we asked ourselves what the responsibility was of a Catholic Jesuit university to the city and to our neighbors. And so we've developed a number of partnerships. For example, the School of Business faculty have developed an innovation center and an incubation center for businesses. Many of the businesses along the York Road corridor are family-owned, and so the Linnane Center at Loyola, which is for closely held firms, works with them. Our clinical programs, we've set up a clinic in the neighborhoods, in the Govins neighborhood that works with speech-language hearing sciences. Our graduate students there are graduate students in the behavioral sciences, in literacy and the like, and it's a very low-cost opportunity for the people in the neighborhood to get these types of services. And it also is enormously educational for our students. They're very much involved in the neighborhood, and we're working with the neighborhood, with the politicians, to develop the amenities that the neighborhood needs. We're a food desert around there. We've arranged through our food service that fresh fruits and vegetables are available in the corner stores, that sort of thing, to make a difference so that the York Road area is a place that is great for students and faculty as well as for our neighbors.
Again, great stories. Thank you. I can't see anybody, as everyone up here has said today, but we'd like to open it up for question and answers from the audience if there are any out there. So please stand up and make yourself known if you're interested in asking any of these presidents a question. We have somebody over here.
So we're at a business summit, and in one of the earlier sessions, they talked about how millennials will dominate the workforce in the year 2020. I'm curious to get what some of your misconceptions are, because you guys have a close proximity with millennials, that are just not accurate based on what you know about the students that are graduating from universities.
I guess public misconceptions versus reality. Anyone? Are you saying that, you know, what sort of the stereotypical view of the millennial versus the reality we're experiencing? Is that yeah. Are they as stereotypical as they appear?
Would you care to enlighten me on what is the stereotype?
Maybe that they are entitled, maybe that they're not loyal, maybe they're lazy, maybe they're more laid back. Are any of these perceptions not accurate based on your experiences?
They are not accurate. My generation treated us as hippies, or were viewed as hippies, and we came out all right. I think this next generation will as well.
Actually, I would agree with Wallace. Not that I was a hippie. But I don't find that the millennials are lazy or non-innovative. It's just that they think about work, many of them, because I hate to paint everybody with a broad brush, a little bit differently. And so work for them, some of them, is not necessarily 8 to 5. You know, it might be 8 to 8. It might be 3 o'clock in the morning. It might be 4 o'clock in the morning. And so one revelation that we had about this at Morgan was that I spent a lot of time in the Silicon Valley and been out to Facebook and Google. We just announced a partnership with them and walked those campuses. And it's amazing, if you will, to experience the innovation there. We at Morgan are very kind of formal, a very kind of formal environment, right? And so what we had to understand is that we have to make sure that the students who are going into certain corporations understand the culture of that particular place and vice versa, because what Facebook and Google pretty much said to us, which went against our way of thinking, is that you need to tell your students that if they show up here and interview in a suit and tie, they're not going to get hired. Because they are looking at things very informally and very, very differently. So I do think there may be a misconception, it could be, based on how work today within certain corporations is performed versus perhaps the way it was performed pre-2007.
Well, from my perspective, I think the really striking thing about this group of students whom we're educating is just how incredibly ambitious, creative, entrepreneurial they are. They are going out into a world where they very much understand this is a world of flux, and they understand all the certainties in terms of the job market that we grew up with, and we could count on institutions and employers being there for a very long time, and to think about lifetime employment. They're not thinking about that in the same way. And I think they recognize in some sense the particular responsibility that they're going to have is for having enough imagination to create opportunities for themselves, that even if they start off in a traditional employment setting, I think they're thinking about this as 2 to 3 year stints and thinking about the opportunities that they have, maybe to go to the next employer, but maybe to start something on their own. So, as Wallace describes his efforts in terms of inculcating this entrepreneurial, innovative ethos, we, I think, are all doing this to some degree. And for me, one of the really striking things is, and I have to confess, it was not anything that I initiated. It was something that just was more market-led. But we found out one day that we just were looking at the minors in the university and seeing that more than 40% of our students in engineering are actually doing minors in entrepreneurship. And so, they're doing traditional majors in biomedical engineering, chemical engineering, whatever, but they're also readying themselves for that possibility. And what's really interesting is that that's carrying over to students in other parts of the university, in the natural sciences, in the social science and humanities, seeing that they need that edge, but ultimately that is an edge that requires them to bring some more initiative, some idea to the party. Let me also say the other thing we shouldn't lose sight of, because I think there's a convergence between the economic and the social aspirations that these kids have. What I also find is really remarkable is, though you know that this generation seems to be less committed to, less engaged in formal political institutions, but that's not to say they aren't community-oriented. They're very powerfully motivated by ideas of the community, the public interest, having impact on that. So that although the traditional party politics may not be intriguing, the number of things that they're doing in impacting the city and its students in the city, various vulnerable populations, just out there thinking about what they can do in terms of new startups in the biomedical space, where you can deliver goods or products, therapies at much lower cost, and doing that in a domestic or an international setting. That's not unusual. That's almost now commonplace. So I think there's a remarkable asset base that you have to work with this group. And the entitlement thing, I think, is grossly overstated. In fact, I think it's a very unfair mischaracterization of what these kids are about.
Thank you. Let me close with just a brief statement. What you've heard today, I think, reflects the strength of American higher education. We have very different kinds of campuses, very different size campuses, all playing a major role in educating the citizens of Maryland and elsewhere. And that's been a real strength in the American system, of having a place for everyone that they can educationally thrive and financially afford. And we want to continue that moving forward. And I know we have some of our two-year partners out in the audience, and we appreciate all that they do, because a lot of those students are coming from them to us. I also want to stress, and I'll end with this, that universities do research, they do teaching, they do a lot of public service, but they're also neighbors. And I think you've heard from our four panelists that they're actively involved, not only in running their institutions as they have traditionally done, but in helping the community in which they reside be a better place. Please join me in giving them a round of applause.